Thank you very much, Stephanie, for covering that very important topic to, I'm sure, everybody in the room and everyone on the webinar. Last but not least, well, before I say that, I just want to say that if you have any questions about any case that was presented, because we covered things very quickly, anything that you've read, any case that we've talked about, any questions at all, please give any one of us a call or send an email, and we're more than happy to answer those questions. Also, we have been known to put on a tailored presentation for our clients. If there is an issue that you'd like to be that you'd like addressed, or perhaps we have the topic already ready to go, such as the fair claims procedures. So just please contact us, and we'd be more than happy to discuss it with you. As I said, the last presentation is going to be very entertaining. The presenters are Guy Stilson, one of our partners in our San Francisco office. He's one of our appellate specialists. He's had numerous successes on cases taken up on appeal, and also does a great deal of work, not exclusively. He works in many different areas, but works on our environmental team, as well as Vernice, who is our one of our senior associates, who's dressed in costume somewhere. Here she is. And they're going to be putting on a very entertaining skit for you regarding asbestos litigation.
Hear ye, calling to order. All rise. Okay, you can sit down now. Now calling to order the asbestos court. And counsel, I would like you to know that this is Judge Louie's first day presiding over the asbestos department, so please go easy.
Come to order. Effective today, I'm the new judge coordinating all of asbestos litigation in this county. I'm taking this assignment over from Judge Lerner Foote, who unfortunately was killed last night in a fiery drunken automobile accident. Since he didn't see the big rig coming, he didn't have time to tell me about this litigation. So, what's the story?
Please, the court, members of the jury, to you guys. My name is Guy Stilson. I'm an attorney with Lowball and Lynch in San Francisco. I handle dozens of asbestos cases every year. Asbestos litigation is the longest, most expensive mass tort in United States history. The first major asbestos cases started in about 1973. There have been over 8,000 different defendants named in the litigation. Some of them, most of them, have been sued multiple times. I could name at least a dozen who have been sued in over 10,000 separate cases. There have been over 700,000 claimants in this litigation, and we've spent $200 billion with a B dollars on this litigation. We're estimating that we've got another $75 to $100 billion to spend before the litigation is over.
Whoa, Mr. Stilson, let's start with the simple stuff. What is asbestos exactly? I understand it's some kind of rock.
Asbestos is a common mineral. It's been mined and used by humans for about 7,000 years. It is fibrous and can be woven or mixed into other products. There are several different forms of asbestos, and they have different properties. In general, asbestos can be used as a strengthening agent, a binding agent, or a protection against heat or fire or even acid.
So what kind of products are we talking about here?
Asbestos has been used in over 3,000 different products. Its first major use in the United States was in the 1860s as insulation. In 1931, we started using it in cement to make cement stronger. From 1907 until the 1980s, we used it as a friction material in brake lines and clutches. During those years, about 99% of vehicles on the roads had asbestos brakes. So asbestos being the best material for this in the 20th century to stop a vehicle, our public and private transportation as we know it today would not exist but for asbestos. It's also used in water and sewer pipes, in gaskets and sealants, and that continued into the 1980s as well. It was used extensively in the military as insulation in ships. It is said, and not improperly, that the Allies won World War II because of asbestos. It's used extensively in construction materials, wallboard, ceilings, floor material, mastics, wallboard. Asbestos fibers, they're everywhere because of this, because they've been used everywhere. They're in this room. We're breathing it now.
We're breathing it now? I thought it was outlawed everywhere.
Yeah, we're breathing it now. To an extent, it's become a part of the natural air that we breathe, more so in some areas than others. Because it is so hard to destroy, once it gets into the atmosphere, it tends to stay there for a long, long time.
So what diseases are caused by asbestos?
Some forms of mesothelioma are clearly caused by asbestos. Mesothelioma is a cancer of the lining of the lung, sometimes other organs, but usually the lungs. It's incurable, it's deadly, and it's a bad death. It's a very painful death. Some lung cancers are caused by asbestos. There's a disease called asbestosis, which is a scarring of the inside of the lung, and that the symptoms of that can range from no symptoms at all to death. That's also caused by asbestos. There's some claims about other cancers that may be caused by asbestos, such as stomach cancer, liver, bladder, colon. There's a lot of medical dispute about those. So when somebody brings one of those claims, one of our defenses is asbestos doesn't do that.
So how long have we known about the adverse health effects of asbestos?
Depends on exactly what you're talking about, but the first recorded mention of possible adverse health effects of asbestos was by a Roman naturalist, Pliny the Elder, in the 12th century. So that's been 900 years we've been talking about this.
So if it hasn't been used commercially in the U.S. since the 1990s, and wasn't really used much in the United States after the mid-1970s, what's all the fuss about? Have these cases been hanging out for the last 40 years?
No. Asbestos-related cases tend to have a long latency period. It can take anywhere from 10 to 60 years after exposure for disease to develop.
What about statute of limitations?
In California, the statute of limitations runs not from the time of exposure, not even from the time the disease develops. In California, the statute of limitations in an asbestos claim runs from the time you start to miss work due to your asbestos disease. Problem is, when it takes 60 years to get the disease, you've probably retired. So there's no statute of limitations.
What are the legal theories?
As to companies that made or sold either raw asbestos or materials, products into which asbestos was incorporated, the primary theory is strict product liability. So in California, strict liability attaches where a product did not perform as safely as an ordinary consumer would have expected, or when the risk of using asbestos outweighed the benefit of using it, or when it was possible for the defendant to know of a problem but not give a warning about it. Because the standard on strict liability with regard to failure to warn is what a defendant could have known, we spend a lot of time in these cases talking about something called the state of the art, which is what medical science knew when they knew it about asbestos.
Well, it must be tough to prove that a particular disease was caused by exposure to asbestos, and where a plaintiff was exposed to asbestos by a number of different potential defendants. It must be hard to show which exposures by which defendants caused the disease. After all, there's a lot of things that cause cancer.
Actually, it's impossible to show what particular exposures caused an asbestos disease to develop. Now, you'd think that might be good for the defense, nice causation defense there, but it's not. Because for asbestos, there's a special rule. All a plaintiff has to show is that an exposure to asbestos increased the chance that they might later get an asbestos disease, then they get that disease. They use statistical models to prove it. So when it's involved, they don't have to actually prove that my client's actions caused their disease, and they can still get huge awards.
So why am I here? There's a lot of tort cases involving injuries and death, lots of negligent cases, lots of product liability cases. What's so special about asbestos that a special judge is needed to handle these cases?
Because asbestos litigation is so massive, and it relates to events that occurred so long ago, and has a certain repeat player quality to it, we see the same defendants, the same products, same diseases, the same lawyers, the same law firms, all the time. Because of that, special rules and practices and concerns have developed in asbestos litigation, which make it different in the way we handle it from any other form of litigation.
Like what? Give me some examples.
So the rules vary from county to county, which certainly helps make everything very clear. But in counties where there's a lot of asbestos litigation, which is Los Angeles, San Francisco, Alameda usually are the ones where we see cases, there are rules that, for instance, when a lawsuit is served, they deem certain discovery to be served as well. So without ever actually having to serve a request for discovery, you have to answer it. So that's called standard discovery.
Okay, I never heard of that sort of procedure before. Are there any other unusual rules in asbestos cases?
There are lots of them. It's different enough that those of us who practice in this area a lot, we kind of refer to the asbestos world. It's kind of like this world, but gravity works differently there. So
What about depositions? You do take depositions, don't you?
we do take depositions. We use a unique procedure. So defendants generally don't serve notices of depositions. What happens? Plaintiff offers their deposition. Plaintiff says, I'm going to be at the Marriott Hotel in San Francisco for the next 10 days. Come and take my deposition. And because we're talking about a person's entire work history, maybe 40 years of work history, and they may have worked in more than one location, sometimes more than 20 locations, and they've probably worked with dozens of products and different employers, and we may have 20, 30, 40, 50 defendants. It's not unusual for one of these depositions to take 10 or 20 days or even longer than that.
So how is expert discovery handled in these cases?
So demands for exchange of expert witnesses are deemed served. No need to actually serve them in most counties. And again, the deposition procedure is that the party who's got the expert, they offer that expert for deposition at a particular time. You show up and take their deposition at that time. An expert who's not timely offered, even if they're on an expert witness list, generally won't be allowed to testify.
It sounds like there's a lot of experts who do nothing but asbestos litigation.
There are. I can list at least a dozen experts who earn fees exceeding $500,000 each year testifying in these cases, and some of them work only part-time.
$500,000, that's a lot of money.
It's a drop in the bucket. You probably know about the TV and radio ads seeking plaintiffs for asbestos cases. A lot of money's also spent on internet advertising. You want to hear the top most expensive paid keyword search in 2014?
Probably not, but maybe the jury does. Do you guys want to hear?
Mesothelioma attorney, Texas. How much do you think was paid per click for that when it showed up in a search? Anybody have an idea? Anybody? Would you believe? Per click. $319.34.
You're telling me that the top paid per click internet search term involves mesothelioma?
Yes, in fact, 13 of the top 20 most expensive pay-per-click searches in 2014 involved the word mesothelioma. The cheapest of those was $187 per click. And that's pretty typical for the last decade or so.
How much do plaintiff attorneys typically spend in advertising costs for each of these cases they handle? It must be thousands.
There are no published studies on that, but I've asked a couple of guys who practice on the plaintiff side, and they tell me that they spend in advertising costs for every case they file about $100,000. I'm sure you do. They're everywhere.
So what kind of monetary awards are typical in these cases?
Well, each case is unique, results vary, but according to a recent Mealy's litigation report, the average mesothelioma trial award is $2.4 million. Now, frankly, I think that sounds low. I'm aware of two recent jury awards here in California. $7 million award in a mesothelioma case in Los Angeles in October. That was a victory for the defense because the demand going into trial was over $20 million. In April, we had another one, a failure to warn case, came down $22 million award. Occasionally there are defense verdicts, thank goodness. Those are usually based on a finding that the disease was not in fact caused by asbestos.
Well, I hear you guys at Lowball and Lynch are pretty good at this stuff. Is it true that you never had an adverse jury award against any of your clients in asbestos cases?
I believe that is true, yes. This is the shameless self-promotion part of the presentation. We've had a couple of cases in recent years that we took to verdict and got defense results on. One was for a company called Armstrong. They make a product called a steam trap. It's a thing about the size of a mason jar. Got a tiny little gasket in it. It had some asbestos in it. Took that one to trial, to verdict in Los Angeles. Got a defense there. What else? What other ones have you heard about? You've worked on one or two
Oh
of these,
yeah,
I
I
think.
worked on one. Actually I worked on both of these. So the second one was actually in the Sacramento County, and it's the Walter case, and our client was Fraser Edwards. Fraser Edwards made a product, a decking material that was used on Navy ships. But the jury they found that the material did not contribute to the development of Mr. Walter's mesothelioma. And so that was a really, really good victory, and that was just a few years ago.
And very recently, we got a defense verdict in a case where we represented San Jose Waterworks. They were laying asbestos cement pipe, and one of the people who was involved in doing that got mesothelioma and sued, and we were able to convince the jury that his employer had all the information, or should have had all the information they knew to protect him. They didn't protect him, therefore it wasn't our fault. Anybody have any questions? It's a crazy world for asbestos, and there's nothing there works the way you think it would. What would you like to know about this funny area in which we practice?
I'd like to know who the current defendants, because a lot of the people with money in the past are gone, insolvent. So who are the people that are getting sued? How far out are we talking? Repeat the question.
Sure. So the question was, who are the defendants getting sued these days? Because most of the asbestos mines, most of the people who made the big asbestos products, they're in bankruptcy and have been for a decade or two. So apart from the miners and the millers, we get on to smaller products. We're now getting down to a stage where the mom and pop hardware store that sold some spackle that had some asbestos in it, they're getting sued.
Mm-hmm.
So we're on to what I would call the third tier of defendants.
So which liability policies are funding these defenses?
I'm not as familiar with the coverage aspects of it. Dave would be the guy to address that, but I'm seeing, generally I'll have a company that will have 4 or 5 different policies that cover a particular time period. I think they're general liability policies, because back then no one knew to exclude asbestos. Now it's always excluded, of course.
If you're hunting for policies, your best hunting grounds between anyone that has a policy between 1970 and
Yeah, so the comment was anything up to about 88, 1990, something like that, is going to have an asbestos exclusion. There are a couple of companies out there I've heard that will do a rider to include it after that date, but that's pretty rare. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Yeah.
All those rules that you mentioned, all those, you do this for depo and you do that for experts and all that, are they codified somewhere?
No, they are not. In fact, I was in trial before the aptly named Judge Stern in Los Angeles, and we were explaining to him how we do things in asbestos world, and he did not like it at all. He held up a copy of the Code of Civil Procedure, held it over the trash can and said, so what you're telling me is you just file this here, and threw it away. And we pretty much said, yeah, that's what we do. It's a strange world, but when we have as much of a repeat player aspect in it, and the attorneys at least know the rules, even if the judges don't, it actually works out pretty well most of the time. Yeah, Dave?
Is there a thing they call secondhand exposure?
Why, yes, there is.
I only ask that because I've been involved with those, and I think people are interested in that.
Sure. Is there a thing called secondhand exposure? Yeah. What sometimes happens is husband works in the factory all day working with asbestos products, and he comes home every night, he hugs his wife, and he pats his kids on the head and sends them to bed. And 40 years later, one of those kids has mesothelioma. And they sue, and that's a form of secondary exposure where they were never working with a product themselves, but it came home on mom or dad's clothing in their car, and we're seeing a fair number of those sorts of cases. Yeah.
We
Very,
actually
very
went
fortunate.
to trial on one of those cases, the Lehman case, in an Alameda case, where the wife got the disease, and we went all the way to verdict, but it was a hung jury, which was a big victory for us. And that was basically the same scenario. The husband came home from work, the wife did the laundry, and got the disease.
Yeah. Joe, did I see your hand?
Is the lower burden of proof apply equally to even a person that has a secondary exposure?
Yeah.
That would be totally unfair.
I agree. Yes. Is the burden of proof applied even in the secondary exposure cases? Yes, it is. Is that unfair? I think so, but I'm a defense guy. Plaintiffs think it's perfectly fair. Anybody else have any questions? Or yes, sir.
Is it accurate that asbestos is only dangerous for private? It's the best form?
Yeah. So most of us have been drinking water today that came through asbestos cement pipes. It's not going to hurt you. It's only if it gets into your lungs. Wet asbestos doesn't get released into the air, so you've got to breathe the stuff in. That's when it can start problems. So if it's in the wallboard and it stays in the wallboard, that's just fine. It's when you're taking that wallboard out and you're going to create some dust, that's when things get dangerous, or at least allegedly dangerous. Yeah. Anybody else, or do I send you off to cocktails? Yeah, yeah.
Question, is there any kind of length of exposure that has been determined that is reasonable to make that correlation?
No, unfortunately. Plaintiffs have a theory that we defense people call the every exposure theory. And what they tell you is because mesothelioma and other asbestos-related diseases are what are called dose-response diseases, the more you get, the higher your percentage chance of getting it. But if you're a plaintiff, presumably you've got it, so you had a 100% chance. So every exposure added to your fiber burden, that's what they call the amount of fibers in your lungs, therefore every exposure contributed to your risk, therefore there's liability for every exposure. Now when you push them hard on it, they'll say, well, maybe not every exposure if you only had a single breath of it. But I'll tell you, I had a case, we got started on trial, and the gentleman recalled, and I have some issues with his memory, but he recalled that on one occasion he walked through a place where somebody was working with my client's product while he was on his way to the bathroom. He was near that product for 30 seconds. And he was suing. And I didn't have a summary judgment motion on that because he identified the product. I kind of had a little problem with him remembering 55 years ago that he saw my client's product for 30 seconds, but I can't prove that's a lie either. So we ended up having to settle that case, unfortunately. Yeah.
So is a mass tort with all these litigants, is it winding down? Are there fewer litigants over time? Or is it just expanding because we're getting down the chain?
It's an excellent question. Is it basically the extent to which this type of litigation is winding down? Everybody predicts that it is winding down. Last year, filings were down. This year, filings are up. So I don't really know. As long as there's somebody in the chain of supply of the product, there's somebody to sue. Because of secondary exposure, just because the people with primary exposures are now in their 70s, 80s, 90s, well, their kids are still around, and they're still in their 30s and 40s. So some of this could go on for another 40 years. Most folks are estimating 10 or 15 years, something like that.
I just wanted to add something. Some of our cases, we are seeing more of other cancers. So a plaintiff would have lung cancer, colon cancer, and they would try to tie that into asbestos exposure. I think maybe 10 years ago, the cases were more straight asbestosis cases or mesothelioma cases. But now, whatever different type of cancer they have, they just tie it in.
Yeah, I'm seeing some blood cancer cases from time to time. Some of the medical claims are getting pretty far out.
I just wanted to say,
Make sure it's on.
hello?
There you go.
I figured everyone could hear me without this.
I think it's for the webinar.
I just wanted to point out that filings can be down in one county, and then filings will be up in another county. And this is also true across the country. There are certain jurisdictions, such as Madison County in Illinois, that has more asbestos cases filed in it every single year than any county in the country. And it is still going strong, even though they've had reforms and many laws there. Texas is not as popular anymore. It used to be very, very popular. And then once they put in some reform laws, made things a little more difficult, all of those Texas lawyers came over to California. They started firms here, and they filed down in Los Angeles. Some of them are filed up here. But there is a lot of forum shopping in the asbestos world.
Anything else? All right, I think it's cocktail time. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Feel free to come up here and get your play money.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you guys so much for such a creative and informative presentation. Thank you, Vernice, for putting on a costume and doing such a great impersonation of an uneducated judge. And Catherine, I want to apologize. I thought you were going to sub for Guy and Vernice when they were unavailable due to an asbestos trial that they must have settled because they were able to be here today. So Catherine was going to pinch hit for them. And since they were available, I didn't realize she was going to be here. So thank you very much, Catherine, for participating. I appreciate that. I would like to thank all of the presenters that presented today. It takes a lot of effort to put all the materials together while they're handling their cases, and they put the PowerPoints together. They learn their materials, and it's all in addition to their regular workload and caseload. So I really appreciate everyone that was here to present today. I'd also like to thank our staff, those of you that are watching from our offices. Many of them helped a great deal to put the materials together, particularly Scarlett and Tammy and Karen. They worked very hard in many different aspects to get everything together today to help to make us look good. And I'd like to also to thank all of you for attending. Without you guys attending, we wouldn't be able to have this. So we really appreciate you being here, and thanks to everyone on the webinar. As I said, we're going to be having the video pieces on our website. We'll send an email out to everyone letting you know when they're there. You can watch again. If you didn't catch something, you can send it to a colleague or look at it for whatever reason you might need to. One last mention and plug for our weekly law resume. It goes out once a week. It is very informative. It goes out on Thursdays or Fridays. It handles one important case that we have deemed important enough to write an article about. So there's 52 a year, and we'd like for you to make sure that you're on our list so that you receive it. If you want to look at any of the old prior articles, those are on our website. And if you are not on the list, please let me know and give me a card, or any of us a card, and we'll make sure that you are added to the list. All right, so I know I'm getting there. It's the next thing on my list, Stephanie. So for those of you that were unable to attend in person, the webinar folks, I'm sorry, but you can't participate in this particular portion. But we have lovely little orchids on the tables, and wine bottles that have some etching in them with the Lobon Lynch insignia, and underneath your chair at your table, there's either a Post-it note with an F or a W. F for flowers and W for wine. So whoever is sitting on the correct chair or nearby, it's blank. Well, look what the other one is. See if it's not blank. We'll see. And then you guys can fight over if the other empty chairs. W? It doesn't say W? Jennifer, what'd she do? You know what? There's only two of you, so you can share the wine or the flowers. So thank you so much, and please stay for cocktails and snacks outside the doors. Please do stay so we can visit with you. And thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.